I want to send a big thank you to my friend Israel for lending his unit to me to review. Hey, what's up guys? I'm Josh, and this is the DX3 Pro from Topping. Now, it took me a while to get to it, and I should have got to it sooner because I gotta say, this thing is in the running for kind of the best small desktop amplifier around the $200 price category. This thing is awesome. But the way that it's awesome is kind of in the jack of all trades, master of none area. It's not the most powerful, it's not the most versatile for outputs, it's not the the most robust build or anything like that, but it is good at literally everything as long as you're working with a digital interface. But you may not need the options that this has on it. And that's really going to be the big question here, is whether or not you need the circumstances that this accepts, because you are paying not necessarily a premium. I think it's more than fairly priced actually, but you are paying, around $200 for all the features that it offers. And if you're not going to utilize those, there's not really a point in purchasing this over some other amps. So the big question with this thing is whether or not it fits your circumstances, because you may not need everything that this offers. And in those circumstances, then I would recommend other products, but we'll talk about that in a second. So let's go ahead and go over the inputs, which is going to be kind of the biggest feature set on here. So from left to right on the back, you have your left and right RCA outputs, and those can go to a pair of powered monitors or another amplifier. The powered monitors would either need to be able to run RCA or TRS. You have two coaxial inputs, and then you have an optical input and a USB input, and this little dongle here, which is going to be your Bluetooth receiver, and then your power input, which does have a power brick. You do need to find a place for that. So basically the back of this covers all your standard digital inputs. The Bluetooth does accept the LDAC codec, and quick note on the LDAC thing, it's not a topping thing, it's an iPhone thing. If you're running an iPhone does not use the LDAC codec, so you can't really take advantage of that. But if you're running Windows or a Windows device or like a laptop or an Android, for example, you can't take advantage of that. Now, to clarify, that doesn't mean you can't use an iPhone with this. You can. You're just not going to be taking advantage of the potential LDAC codec that is in this. So as you can see by the inputs, this is heavily oriented towards digital use only. There are actually no analog inputs for this device. So if you're running anything that has an analog input, this is not really going to be the amp for you. There's a couple other options that I would look at. Maybe if you're just looking for an amplifier, something like the shit Asgard. The third one, that's about the same price range. Now, in terms of outputs, it's really simple. You have that RCA left and right out, and you have a 3.5 millimeter out, which, yeah, I know. It should have been a 1/4 inch. It's not, but you can get an adapter for, $5 or something like that. So one big feature and a big selling point to this thing over some other amplifiers at this price range is going to be the remote. So you have things like the Shit Hell, which offer a little bit more power and different options in terms of inputs and outputs, and this is a mic interface. It's not really the same amp, but it is about the same price, but no remote. Asgard 3, no remote. Some of the Aeuns, no remote. You do have things like the SMSL AD18, which is a very versatile both speaker amplifier and headphone amplifier, but the headphone amplification portion is not nearly as good as is on the topping, but it does come with a remote. So it is kind of a competitor, but again, completely different use cases. And there's not too many things about this price range that offer the same feature set for the price with the same quality of the headphone output, which is really a big portion of what you're paying for here. Now, some additional information on this remote. This controls every feature of the amplifier. You can control a few features like volume and selection input, and whether you want the DAC out or the headphone out via this scroll wheel here. And it is infinitely scrolling, which is why the digital interface. So on the remote, you can control everything from volume up, input switching, DAC out, headphone out, or both. Your different filter options. You can even control how dim you want the actual digital output to look. So the battery on the back, it doesn't really engage unless I slightly press on the cover. So that's just a weird quirk of this particular remote. I don't think that's going to be a problem. It's more like the spring in there is really weak. But other than that, the remote works pretty much flawlessly. Okay, so I have some miscellaneous things to keep in mind before we talk about power and, of course, the sound. Okay, so there is no volume change when you switch from your headphone output to your DAC output. And you can run either or you can run both. So you can run both simultaneously if for some reason you want to. So the reason I bring this up is because the volume goes from 100 to 0, negative 100 to 0, 0 being the loudest, of course. And then you have high and low gain and stuff like that. If you're playing, let's say, a 20 on a pair of headphones and you switch over to the DAC, it's going to be playing 20 out of the DAC. So it's not going to reset the volume. So if you've got a pair of speakers that are running a little bit louder volume at that 20 level, and maybe you're normally at a 50 or something like that, it's gonna blast. And it's gonna do that both ways. So if you're listening to like a 10 or a 5 or even a 0 on the speakers, and then you switch over to the headphones, it's gonna blast out of the headphones if it can't handle the power. So I actually like this system. It's a little bit dangerous and it requires you to think a little bit, but I prefer it rather than the volume resetting. Like the Sprout 100, every time you'd switch between the speaker outputs and the headphone output, the volume would completely reset and you'd have to turn it back up. And I prefer to think a little bit. It is more dangerous and something to be aware of though. Another weird quirk here is that when you have the Bluetooth enabled, every time you get sort of a notification, if the Bluetooth is not currently playing and it's kind of in like the standby mode where if you play something it will activate, but when you stop playing it goes into kind of a standby mode, there's a little bit of a click. So every time you're getting notifications, it's playing the notification sound through the Bluetooth. But if the phone is on your desk and this is on your desk, all you're hearing is just this slight like kind of re-engagement click. And I'll try and replicate it on video here. And then the last thing for this section is going to be the filter options. There are 6. I think the default number is 4. Not sure why the default's not 1, but there are different filtering options for the DAC. So when should you buy this thing? So it's got 0.7 watts into 32 ohms, like 700 milliwatts into 32 ohms. And that's honestly gonna be more than enough power for the vast majority of headphones. You'll have some really picky headphones that don't like it. You'll have some really low efficiency headphones, like your really, really big, really expensive planars that aren't gonna be quite powered enough by it. And things like argons, for example, are not gonna do so well, but the vast majority of headphones are gonna sound pretty good. And something I've always loved about Topping is their choice of the quality of sound over the quantity of the power out. So a few headphones that I tried on here that I really did like was the LCD1, the DT1990 Pro, the HD660S, and the Aeon X, and that HE1000 SE back there. And then there was a couple headphones that I didn't like so much because it either couldn't power it or it didn't sound really as nice as I would like on that particular headphone, being the HD800S, the Aria, and the argons. I just don't think it had enough power for the argons. Those Arias for some reason seem to be really misleading. Like you need way more power than you think you do for some reason. I don't know why, they just soak up power. So the sound quality of this thing, well, of course, being Topping, they're gonna choose the quality of the output, like I said, over the quantity of the power. There's very low distortion. In fact, compared to the Shit Hell, which has a little bit more power, about 25% more power at about 1 full watt at 32 ohms. This hits distortion about 3 o'clock on the dial, whereas the Topping, even on high gain, never really got to sound distorted. So I think the Topping is definitely playing within its power really, really well and not overreaching. And so you can pretty much maximize this thing out and you're not really gonna suffer at all for kind of, playing it fairly hard on some harder to drive headphones. Now another noticeable thing is the noise floor. The noise floor is very silent and pretty much on par with things like the Shit Hell in the low gain setting on here at least. Now when it comes to the sound quality of the Topping, the basic way I would describe it is being very clean and crisp and clear, but not overly sterile. And it's got a good kind of level of vibrancy via the dynamic capability. The bass response on the Hell seems to be a bit stronger, but that could be a power discrepancy because it's really hard to get the volume levels to be exactly apples to apples here. So it could be a slight, volume difference that I wasn't noticing when setting the both and comparing them. But comparatively, it does seem like the Hell has a bit more distortion, especially when you get up into those higher volumes, then it becomes really noticeable. But within the realm that they both play well in their own fields, I think I like the Topping a bit more. It's just a little bit cleaner, but I personally like the feature set for my circumstances of the Shit Hell. And that brings me to the conclusion of the Topping DX3 and when and where I recommend it and for who. If you have a lot of digital sources that you need to plug multiple things into one single device that you want to send to either a pair of powered monitors or a pair of headphones or both, this is a great option. I honestly think it is. If you're a little bit more limited in your use case though, for example, like at this desk, which is where I would use this amplifier personally, I pretty much only use USB. So the Shit Hell is good enough for me. But your circumstances are definitely going to be different than mine. And I gotta admit, the use of Bluetooth is something that I didn't initially think I would use all that much, but I've actually been using it quite a bit, and I actually used it recently to compare the sound quality against the Drop Panda for their Bluetooth merits. And I think the Panda handles the Bluetooth aspect a little bit better than the topping does, but the topping was not something that I would complain about by any means. Or if you're working with a pair of powered monitors that you don't have Bluetooth for, and you'd want something like this to send Bluetooth and have the volume control on your desktop, this is going to be a great option for that. So as far as downsides go, I really couldn't find any major flaws here. I didn't find anything that didn't really work well. Everything sounded good. Everything functioned nicely. I gotta admit, I'm a little bit skeptical of the filter options. I didn't really notice the difference myself, but you know, that's not really a main reason to buy this in my opinion anyways, so it's a small gripe there. And then really the only thing that I wish was different was the 1/4 inch in the front. And I really wish they had gotten the power brick inside the unit, just make it a little bit bigger. That way you could have a small plug, and that way you're not having to fight for space on a power strip like you are currently. But other than that, I think this thing is awesome. Fair price, fair product, works well, sounds great. And that's about it. It's just whether or not it fits your lifestyle or not. All right, guys, that's gonna wrap it up. Thank you very much for watching. Until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.